of the Jam. Howard Ankin with Ankin Law is here to tell us about your legal rights when it comes to catching or possibly spreading the coronavirus. Howard, it's great to have you in.
Thanks for having me.
There are so many questions surrounding the virus. It's obviously unprecedented. I think a lot of things are going to be figured out as it kind of plays out. But what are some of the basic rules people have and their rights surrounding the virus and in terms of legal rights?
Well, in general, you have two rights. I guess one, if you're hurt at work, you have the right to file workers' compensation if you get coronavirus at work. Also, if you're having problems with having coronavirus, the federal government has given, paid time off to people through certain employers if they're having problems because of the coronavirus or they get the coronavirus.
I got to ask about outside of work. So I joined a new gym where all the social distancing is happening and the masks are happening. But of course, I signed a waiver. That's not unusual, even at some restaurants or some places you go. First of all, do those waivers mean anything? Can I sue a private business or somewhere if I know that I get coronavirus from there? Or I guess that's part of the question.
Yeah. So, the waivers, they do work. They're basically saying, these gyms or these restaurants or these places of business are saying, this is something that we're going to control the best that we can control. But if you're coming to use our services, you're using our services at your own risk. So unless there's something that, I assume if you could try to prove that like they knew that they had somebody working at this restaurant or gym who had the coronavirus and they didn't do anything to protect people when they get there, and you could prove it, you could probably get around the waiver. But otherwise, those waivers are gonna work.
So if I go to a bar, restaurant, or gym and they don't have me sign a waiver, can I then file suit against them if I do catch COVID-19?
Can and the ability to win, those might be two separate things. So yes, can, and that's probably why some of the businesses that have thought this through, because you can, that's why they're having you sign the waiver, because they're trying to prevent the can. The real issue is causal connection. You have to prove that you got COVID because you were at that restaurant. And I think proving the causal connection or the causation between having COVID or a COVID-related problem to being at a certain place or establishment of business, that might be difficult to do.
Yeah, I mean, contact tracing within the United States is still pretty sporadic. It's getting better, but there's not really a way to absolutely prove this restaurant is where I sat down and got the virus 5 days ago.
It's definitely, more difficult. Now, in the work-related situation, here in the state of Illinois, they've created some rules where they've provided some assumptions about that if you've contracted COVID, that it would be work-related. But we've done that in the obtaining or getting COVID as a work-related injury outside of work, like just going to a restaurant or an establishment or place of business. We don't have, those things, so it's going to be a lot harder proving the causation.
Earlier this week, we were talking to someone from the city about intimidation for workers in terms of going back if they don't feel safe, and what could happen if a business decides to, lessen their pay, fire them, or change their shifts or whatever. Do you anticipate people that coming up a lot more as businesses really do try to reopen and try and get their workers back in the building?
This topic that you're talking about, this is on fire. Okay, this is really a hot topic, conversation for us. We have a lot of frontline workers that were working through a lot of this drama in March, April into May, where we had a lot of people that were working at hospitals and those types of things where they had to work. Now we have a situation coming up, this late August, early September, where it's time for everybody to go back to school, and there's a question now about protecting our teachers, and do the school systems have the resources to protect our teachers when they go back, and should they go back or shouldn't they go back? there's a hot topic issue, for what we need to do as a society. There's some people that, think we need to move forward. And there's some people who are saying, it's too dangerous for me to go back. That's why, we have our politicians. For me, unfortunately, if people get COVID or they have a problem, I'm in the trenches and I take the law as it comes and try to do my best to help people.
Yeah, I would assume for you guys, this is a huge learning curve as well. But let's say there's a company that, they took all the precautions, the PPE is available to their employees, the plexiglass is up, and an employee feels comfortable going back to work, is there for a couple of weeks, and ends up getting the virus anyway. Now, again, we don't know if it was there or somewhere else, but what legal stance do they have?
I get that call all the time, and unfortunately, people, even though companies are taking the best stance that they can, providing PPP, trying to have social distancing, try to have people work remotely, but there are times that people are still getting COVID while working at work, and they have a work-related injury, they have an Occupational Disease Act injury. We're filing claims on that, weekly here.
Does any of this change when we talk about airplane travel, going to airports and things like that? Are there any differences?
For me, I'm trying to stay away from going to the airport. So I don't know exactly what those differences are. But there are people that are, still doing air travel. Last week, the city of Chicago just came out and said that there was 14 different states that if you were traveling back from one of those states back into the city, that you had to confine yourself for 14 days before you did that. And I'm assuming that if the numbers keep going up in other states around the country, that probably the city is going to continue to further try to restrict people who are coming back by air travel or any other means to have to quarantine themselves.
I imagine we're going to have so many new laws written out of this, whether they're local, state, or federal. I imagine every company is going to be trying to provide themselves some sort of security from this virus or future ones. Obviously, this changes a lot. But as a lawyer, all you guys can really do is read the law and try and interpret it. But we won't know exactly how this is all going to shake out until we start getting some rulings, right? We need some jurisprudence to guide what people are actually going to be able to sue for or not.
Yeah, I think in terms of it being a work-related injury, I think it's going to be pretty straightforward that if you contract COVID as a work-related matter, you're going to get compensation. It's the right to get your medical, lost time, and if you have any permanent injury, money for that. There was a recent case that was filed by an attorney on behalf of an estate for somebody who passed away that worked at a Walmart, and I think it was like at the end of June, they just filed a motion to dismiss, on that case, basically saying that somebody that got hurt at the Walmart, they have the right to file for an Occupational Disease Act recovery. And I think that's really where the law is going with that. In terms of being able to prove against an establishment that, somebody contracted COVID there, possibly they may be able to do it, but I think those cases are going to be pretty difficult. I think the situation that we have with some nursing homes where, there was, people, were dying in these nursing homes past these couple months. I think being able to prove that people contracted COVID at the nursing homes, I think they're going to be able to do that. Overall, in terms of our society, some people, they joke sometimes that say that we have a litigious society, but for me, I don't really see that. I think people in our society are not that litigious, and they bring the cases that they should, and that they don't bring the cases that they shouldn't. With everything, there's always somebody that's trying to, do something or bring something where they're pushing the envelope, and that gets some news play. But eventually, after the news story goes bad, those stories, get dismissed and they move on. So in terms of people getting COVID, I think people are worried about it. I think it's new. I think people are concerned. But ultimately, as far as the law is concerned, I think the law is going to, work well as it always does to protect people in society that need the law that worked for them, and that for things that don't really need the law related to COVID, people are gonna, get along and move forward together.
I actually have a friend who is battling and looking into legal options because she was supposed to be use an au pair to help her with her childcare. And now because of the visa ban that the president has ordered, that au pair can't come into the country. But her company is pushing her to go back to work, but she doesn't have childcare. And so she's wondering if, because of this is also COVID related, that her company needs her to come back to work, does she have any legal grounds to stand on?
So, when you talk about this, I practice, my field of expertise is in injury, but, for people that practice in the employment law field, under the Americans with Disabilities Act, the federal government did provide some additional things to people who cannot go back to work and cannot get child care. Now, whether they couldn't get their au pair, but they could, put their child into some other daycare, that would have to be, analyzed through somebody that specializes in employment. Also with that, a big topic right now is people looking through insurance policies and people looking through contracts to see if those contracts actually should hold or not hold. We have force majeure in many contracts, which basically say, as an act of God, if there's something that is happening that was out of anybody's control, that those contracts may not hold. Also, there's some contracts that some businesses have where they're basically saying, if I can't open and I can't do work, that I would be covered under this policy to get reimbursement for, different things that their business policy may have. And those contracts are also being heavily litigated as to whether, COVID has a restriction or doesn't have a restriction as far as those policies are concerned.
Your profession will be
yes,
very busy.
For anybody that has a special situation, they should be calling an attorney and talking to somebody who has, specialized in a particular field in order to get the advice that they need in order to help them get where they need to go.
Ooh, there's a lot to go through.
This is why you call Howard Ankin, everyone.
Yeah.
This is why you do it, okay?
I'm here to help.
Howard, thank you very much, Howard. Really appreciate you. For Injury Law Made Personal, visit ankinlaw.com.
Thanks, Howard.
Stuff there.
All right.